"Mommy hurts me," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't want to hear it, didn't want to believe it. But then Gabriel's voice, calm and calculated, broke the silence. "Did she tell you?" I had 10 seconds to decide, to speak up and risk my life, or to stay silent and pretend I never heard a thing. The choice wasn't mine, not really. Not in this house, under this roof. I stood frozen, the soft tremble of Lily's words echoing in my mind. Her small face was buried in the crook of my arm, her tear-soaked cheeks pressed against my sleeve as if to hide the hurt she'd just confessed. But I couldn't hide from it. There was no escaping the truth. Not anymore. It had been 2 weeks since I entered the Moretti mansion. 2 weeks since my father, a man consumed by his gambling addiction, had sold my life for a chance to get out of the hole he'd dug for himself. I wasn't here because I chose it. I was here because I had no choice. Babysitting Lily Moretti, the daughter of Gabriel, the ghost Moretti, was the price for my family's freedom. And now, here I was, in this luxurious, suffocating cage of gold and marble, standing at the crossroads of silence and truth. The mansion was a fortress, large, imposing, and eerily silent. Every corner screamed of wealth and power, every polished surface a reflection of the empire Gabriel had built. The ghost wasn't just a name. It was a reminder that Gabriel Moretti was a man who controlled everything, including the lives of those in his orbit. My life, now intertwined with his world, felt more like a curse than a blessing. The house was filled with secrets, ones I was barely scratching the surface of, but Lily's whisper had dragged me deeper into them than I ever intended. My father's debts had placed me in this gilded cage, and every day I lived here, I felt that weight grow heavier. The beautiful chandeliers, the expensive tapestries, the perfectly manicured gardens, they all looked like symbols of wealth and power, but I saw them for what they were. Prison bars, gilded and flawless, keeping me trapped in this world I had no place in. The weight of Gabriel Moretti's empire pressed down on me every time I stepped into a room. The staff treated me with a kind of respectful distance, their eyes flicking over me, as if they could see right through me to the shame I carried. They knew who I was, and they knew what I had become, a pawn in a game that I didn't even understand. They didn't pity me, though. No, that would have been too kind. They simply watched, waited, and in the back of their eyes I saw something else. Fear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and kindly subscribe. It wasn't just fear of Gabriel. It was fear of what this life could do to you if you were unlucky enough to get caught in its web. And I was trapped, whether I liked it or not. But none of that mattered when I heard Lily's voice, small, soft, trembling like a broken bird's. "Mommy hurts me." The words sliced through the noise of my own thoughts, cutting through the overwhelming weight of the house. I blinked, trying to process what I had just heard. Was it just a slip of the tongue? A child's exaggerated imagination? But no. Lily's wide eyes, the way her small body trembled against mine, told me it was real. I had always assumed that the Moretti family was a model of perfection. Gabriel and Veronica Moretti, rich, powerful, untouchable, had the kind of life people only dreamed of. Veronica, with her icy beauty and polished smile, seemed like the perfect mother. She was always composed, always in control. But there was something in her eyes that hinted at the coldness beneath that perfect facade. I hadn't been prepared for the reality. The cold stares, the cold silences, the unspoken rules of their world. It was all suffocating. And here I was, a girl with no family, no future of her own, being asked to care for a child in a world that didn't care about anything but power. Then Gabriel appeared. His presence filled the room even before his feet made a sound on the marble floor. It was a physical thing, his aura, his stillness. His dark eyes locked onto mine, sharp and calculating, like a predator who had just spotted prey. I felt it, deep in my chest. A tightening, a fear that made it hard to breathe. "Did she tell you?" Gabriel asked, his voice low, laced with something darker than just curiosity. I froze. My heart stuttered, pounding painfully in my chest. What was I supposed to say? How was I supposed to respond? My mind screamed at me to stay quiet, to say nothing, to avoid the wrath of a man who could easily crush me with just a look. But Lily's innocent, terrified face flashed before me. She needed help. She needed someone to stand up for her. And I was the only one who could. I turned my head away from Gabriel, my throat constricting as I tried to find my voice. My fingers trembled as I gently pushed Lily off my lap, her small hands pulling away from me with reluctance. "Yes," I whispered, barely louder than a breath. She told me. Gabriel's gaze didn't falter. His eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, the silence between us grew thick, oppressive. My pulse raced as the tension built, stretching the air in the room until it was almost unbearable. He didn't speak right away, but I could feel the weight of his presence, the power that radiated from him. I wondered if he already knew the truth, if he had heard rumors or seen the signs. Or was he testing me, waiting to see if I would lie? The seconds ticked by, each one dragging me further into the abyss of fear and uncertainty. But in the end, it didn't matter. I knew what I had to do. The decision had already been made. The mansion had grown quiet again, but I couldn't escape the weight of what had just transpired. The questions still lingered in the air. What now? I had spoken the truth, but at what cost? Would Gabriel, the man who controlled everything, including life and death in his world, protect his daughter? Or would I become another casualty of his empire? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for sure. My life, and Lily's, had just become infinitely more dangerous. As I sat there in the cold silence of the room, my thoughts drifted back to the moment I first stepped into the Moretti mansion. The iron gates had groaned open before me like an animal reluctant to reveal its true nature. I had no idea how much my life was about to change. The realization crept up on me slowly, like a shadow that lengthened just out of reach. My days blurred into a monotonous routine, waking up early, making breakfast for Lily, making sure she was dressed in the pretty little outfits Veronica had chosen for her, and then spending hours in silence, trying to keep the child entertained in a house that felt as cold and hollow as the marble floors I walked on. But something was different now. I could feel it in the air, in the silence that weighed heavier every time I crossed paths with Veronica Moretti, Lily's mother. The chill in her smile, the coldness in her eyes whenever she glanced my way, had grown more pronounced. I wasn't sure if I was just imagining it, but the house felt more oppressive, more stifling, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. I had seen the signs of Lily's trauma before, but now, those signs were more evident, more undeniable. I watched her carefully as she played with the blocks on the floor of the sitting room, her small hands shaking ever so slightly as she stacked them one by one. The late afternoon sunlight streamed in through the tall, arched windows, casting a soft glow across the room. It should have been peaceful, tranquil even. But all I could feel was the weight of Lily's fear. She flinched when the door creaked open. Veronica entered the room, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she glided in with an air of detached perfection. Her eyes swept over Lily, pausing for just a moment on the child's trembling form, before flicking dismissively toward me. I saw the way Lily's shoulders stiffened at the mere sight of her mother, the way she pulled her hands away from the blocks, as if trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the floor. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Lily didn't speak, didn't even look up. She simply clutched the blocks tightly in her hands, her knuckles pale, her entire body wound tight as if she were bracing herself for something she couldn't escape. I tried to mask my own unease, glancing between Veronica and Lily. Veronica had noticed Lily's withdrawal, but there was no concern in her eyes, no maternal instinct, just annoyance. "You're still playing with those things?" Veronica's voice was cold, sharp, cutting through the silence. "You should be drawing, learning something useful." Lily didn't respond. She simply nodded, the faintest trace of fear flickering in her eyes. Veronica's lips curved into a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze lingered on Lily, calculating, before she turned and left the room as abruptly as she'd entered. Lily exhaled, a soft, trembling breath, and my heart broke for her. The moment Veronica was gone, the fear melted from her face, but her eyes, those eyes, remained haunted. I could see the weight of something far deeper than a child's typical shyness. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Lily's trauma was no longer a whisper in the back of my mind. It was front and center, a glaring truth that I couldn't escape. I had to help her. I had to do something. But what? I was just the babysitter. What was I supposed to do in a house ruled by fear, by a mother who controlled every aspect of her daughter's life with cold precision? My fingers tightened around the edge of the armchair as I watched Lily absent-mindedly flick through a picture book. I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but I knew the limits of my position. Veronica would never allow me to get too close, not if she knew what I was really seeing. The following morning, I took Lily into the garden, hoping the fresh air would ease her restless energy. But even outside, in the midst of blooming roses and tall oak trees, there was an underlying sense of unease. The garden was pristine, perfect. The flowers carefully manicured like everything else in this house. But it was just another stage, another place where appearances were everything. Lily walked beside me, her small hand barely brushing the fabric of my sleeve. She wasn't her usual quiet self today. Her movements were stiff, robotic, as if she were too afraid to take up any space in the world. I kept glancing at her, wondering what was going on in that young mind of hers. She was so small, so fragile. She shouldn't have to carry these burdens, these shadows, at her age. After a few moments, Lily stopped in front of a rose bush. The flowers were deep red, their petals rich and velvety. She pointed to one, her small finger trembling as she spoke in her soft, hesitant voice. "Flower," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I crouched beside her, a smile playing on my lips as I admired the bloom. I hadn't seen her this engaged in something in days. I wanted to encourage this moment of normality, to give her something small, something beautiful to hold on to. "The petals are so soft, aren't they?" I said softly, brushing my fingers over one of the blooms. "Just like velvet." Lily nodded, her eyes wide and full of quiet wonder. But there was something else in them too. A sadness, a burden that shouldn't have been there. As I looked at her, I couldn't help but think about my own childhood. Growing up, I had always felt like an outsider, like I was never truly part of the family. My parents were always distant, always caught up in their own struggles, leaving me to fend for myself. My mother's coldness was always more pronounced than any affection she showed, and my father, consumed by his own troubles, was absent in ways that went far beyond physical distance. I'd never experienced a childhood like Lily's. My memories were not filled with warmth and love, but with isolation and loneliness. I learned early on to keep to myself, to blend into the background and avoid drawing attention. I knew what it was like to feel invisible, to carry a weight that no one saw. And now, looking at Lily, I saw that same loneliness reflected in her eyes. It was a feeling I knew all too well. As the days went on, my suspicion grew. Veronica's presence in the house only made things worse. Every time she entered a room, there was an oppressive energy that followed her, like a cold breeze sweeping through the house. The emotional distance between her and Lily was growing more apparent. Veronica would give Lily the coldest of smiles, a smile that never reached her eyes. She rarely spoke to her daughter, and when she did, it was always in clipped, sharp tones, as if Lily were a burden she had to tolerate. I could see how Lily cringed at the sound of her mother's voice. It made me sick. It was during one of our art sessions that I saw it, the unmistakable signs of abuse. Lily had been sitting quietly at the table, a set of watercolor paints spread before her. Her small hands shook as she dipped the brush into the water, her concentration absolute. As I stood behind her, offering her a smile and a few encouraging words, my gaze fell on her exposed arm. A bruise, a large one, dark and purplish, just above her elbow. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the first time I had seen something like this. Faint marks, lingering shadows of violence hidden beneath her clothes. But this bruise was different. It was fresh. It was clear. And it was undeniable. I wanted to shout, to confront someone, to take Lily and run far away from this house. But I didn't. I couldn't. My place here was too fragile, too dangerous. And as I looked at Lily, who didn't even seem to notice the mark, my heart broke. She had become so accustomed to hiding her pain, to suppressing her fear, that she didn't even flinch when I saw the bruise. The house was growing colder by the day, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. I had to do something. But what? What could a babysitter do in a world ruled by people like Gabriel Moretti, a man who had the power to destroy lives with just a flick of his finger? But if I didn't do something soon, I feared I would lose the one chance I had to save Lily from the monsters in her life. As I stared at the bruise on Lily's arm, the weight of my decision pressed down on me. I could no longer ignore the signs. I had to act. But how? In a house ruled by power and fear, where silence was the law, speaking out could mean my own destruction. I had to make a choice. Stay silent, or risk it all to protect her. The choice seemed impossible. But I couldn't look away from her anymore. The tension in the Moretti mansion was unbearable, thick like smoke hanging in the air. The more I watched, the more the house's opulence seemed to mock the brokenness beneath its surface. The gilded frames, the towering chandeliers, the endless halls filled with cold perfection. It all felt like a mask. And behind that mask, I could hear the echoes of fear and pain, whispering from every corner. It wasn't just Lily's silent distress that plagued me anymore. It was Gabriel's gaze, that cold, calculating look he shot me when our paths crossed, when he caught me in moments of unguarded care for his daughter. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. His attention was a predator's gaze, sharp and watchful, measuring every step I took, every word I spoke. Gabriel's suspicion grew over the days that followed. I could feel it in the weight of his silence, the way his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. I thought I was being careful not to overstep, careful not to draw attention. But it didn't matter. Gabriel didn't miss a thing, not even the way I looked at Lily, the way I hesitated when Veronica passed through a room. It started with small things, a question here, a casual remark there. At first, I thought it was just his way of making small talk, but then I realized it was more. He was testing me, probing. "How is she today?" he asked one morning, his eyes watching me with a sharpness that made my skin prickle. "Lily, I mean." "She's fine," I said, forcing a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. But I knew, deep down, that my answer hadn't satisfied him. It never did. He didn't push further, but the look in his eyes lingered, and I realized, in that moment, that Gabriel had seen something. He knew that I wasn't just here to do my job. He could see that I was invested in Lily's well-being, and I knew that was dangerous. If he had any inkling of the truth I was beginning to uncover, I wouldn't last long in this house. Veronica, too, had started to notice. Her cold demeanor was always present, but now, there was an undercurrent of something more, something darker. She watched me with a calculating gaze, her smile no longer polite but razor-sharp. It was as if she knew that I was beginning to piece together the lies that her life was built on. One evening, as I was clearing the table after dinner, I felt her presence behind me, like a shadow creeping closer. I didn't turn around at first, but I could feel her eyes on my back, burning with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're quite fond of my daughter, aren't you?" Veronica's voice was low, smooth, like velvet, but I could hear the steel beneath it. There was no warmth in her words, only a quiet menace. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "I care about her. She's just a child." "Yes," she said, her smile thin, her eyes cold. "She is. And you're here to take care of her, aren't you? Not to interfere with my family, though. I trust we understand each other." Her words were veiled in sweetness, but I knew what she was really saying. Don't step out of line. Don't question the way things are. This was her world, her domain, and I was just a temporary player in it. "I understand," I replied quietly, my voice betraying none of the fear that knotted in my stomach. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized just how deeply manipulative she was. Her calmness, the way she spoke with that chilling politeness. It wasn't just a demeanor. It was a weapon, a tool she used to control the people around her. And I was no exception. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, I felt a weight settle on my chest. The soft glow of the nightlight flickered in the corner of the room, casting long shadows on the walls. Lily, as always, was quiet, her small form curled up beneath the covers. She didn't look at me as I sat beside her, but I could feel her gaze, her eyes flickering towards me every so often. I tucked the blanket around her tighter, brushing a lock of hair away from her forehead. Her skin was warm beneath my fingertips, but there was something colder in her eyes, something far too old for a child her age. I kissed her forehead, lingering for a moment longer than usual. "Sleep well, Lily," I whispered, but she didn't sleep. "Mommy hurts me," she whispered, her voice so soft, so fragile, that I almost didn't hear it. But I did. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just a cry for help anymore. It was a plea I couldn't ignore. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The words hung in the air between us like a cloud of smoke, suffocating me. My mind raced, my pulse quickening. I had promised myself I would stay out of this. I wasn't a part of this family. I wasn't supposed to get involved. But how could I ignore what was happening to this child? How could I turn away? I leaned in closer, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, Lily?" My voice trembled despite myself. "What's going on?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes were glassy, distant, as if she was somewhere far away, trapped in a world I couldn't reach. Then, her small hand crept out from beneath the blanket, trembling as it grasped mine. "Mommy, she hurts me when no one's looking." The words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I sat there, staring at Lily, trying to find the right words, trying to process the confession that had just shattered everything I thought I knew about this house, about this family. But there were no right words. What could I say? What could I do? Lily's head rolled against the pillow, her eyes fluttering shut, but her hands still clutched mine like a lifeline. She was asleep, or perhaps pretending to sleep, but I could hear the faint tremors in her breathing. Her small body was shaking, but I wasn't sure if it was from fear, from cold, or from something far deeper. I should have done something then. I should have taken her and run. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the fear of what would happen if I exposed the truth. If I told Gabriel. What would he do? What would become of Lily then? But I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't ignore what was happening right in front of me. I spent the next few hours in a fog, pacing through the vast halls of the mansion, my mind racing. The house, so silent and still, seemed to press in on me from all sides. I could hear the faint echo of footsteps somewhere down the hall, but they didn't belong to me. They belonged to the ghosts of this place, to the dark secrets that lurked behind every corner. What was I supposed to do? I didn't have the answers. I didn't know what would happen if I told Gabriel the truth. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Lily stay in this hell any longer. And then, just as I was about to make up my mind, the door to the room creaked open. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Gabriel, his dark eyes locked onto mine, piercing, unwavering, as if he had been watching me all along. He didn't say a word, just stood there, his figure silhouetted by the dim light from the hallway. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. But then, in that low, controlled voice of his, he asked, "Did she tell you?" I froze, the air between us thick with tension. My heart pounded in my chest, my thoughts scrambled. I didn't know what to say, how to say it. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything, but I was terrified, terrified of the consequences, terrified of what would happen to Lily if I exposed the truth. Gabriel stepped forward, his gaze never leaving mine, his presence heavy in the room. His eyes flicked briefly to Lily, still asleep in her bed, before returning to me. "Did she tell you?" His voice was quieter this time, but still as menacing as ever. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. The weight of Gabriel's gaze pressed down on me, and for the first time, I realized that the moment I had been avoiding had arrived. I couldn't hide anymore. The truth was waiting to be spoken, and I had to decide, once and for all, whether I would stay silent or expose the darkness that lurked behind the polished walls of the Moretti mansion. The silence between Gabriel and me hung in the air like a thick fog. His presence was overpowering, like a dark cloud that covered the entire room. His eyes never left me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze, each second dragging me deeper into the abyss of uncertainty. His question, "Did she tell you?" still echoed in my ears, the words reverberating with the promise of consequences. I stood frozen, my throat tight, my heart racing in my chest. I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins, the fear of what would happen if I told him the truth almost choking me. Everything I had worked so hard to avoid, the dark truth of this family, the abuse, the silent terror Lily had been living under, it all surged to the forefront of my mind. Should I say it? Should I speak the truth? I had already betrayed my own instinct to stay out of it. Lily's words, "Mommy hurts me," had cracked the protective wall I had built around myself. The anger, the desperation, the feeling of helplessness surged within me. How could I stay silent knowing what I now knew? I stared at Gabriel. He was so calm, so composed, his dark eyes sharp, his posture immaculate. Everything about him screamed control. There was no rage, no panic in him. Instead, there was a quiet power, the kind of power that could destroy a person in an instant. A power that had crushed everyone who dared to challenge it. I wasn't sure what he would do if I spoke. I didn't know whether he would protect his daughter, or if I would be the one who paid the price for breaking the silence. In that moment, everything that had led me here seemed to flash before my eyes. The moment I first arrived at the mansion, the growing suspicion I'd felt, the silent watching eyes of the staff, Veronica's icy demeanor, and finally, Lily's tears. My past, my father's mistakes, my own inability to stand up for myself when I needed to. All of it had brought me to this point. I had always been afraid of powerful people, people who could bend the world to their will. I had seen what it could do to someone's spirit, how it could break them, turn them into something they never intended to be. My father had been one of those people, a man who had let addiction and weakness guide his decisions, and I had paid the price for it. I had promised myself I would never let power control me again. But here I was, trapped in a world even darker than I had imagined, trapped by a man who held the fate of not only my life, but also Lily's in his hands. I thought about the times in my own life when I had let fear dictate my actions. I had always been the quiet one, the one who avoided confrontation, the one who let things slide to keep the peace. I had lived my life hiding in the shadows, never daring to stand up for myself, always letting the controlling figures in my life take the reins. It was the same with my father. I had watched him destroy himself with his addiction, and I had done nothing. I had been too afraid of confronting him, too afraid of the consequences. I had let him manipulate me, guilt me into believing that I was responsible for his failures. But Lily was different. She was a child, innocent, vulnerable. She didn't have the strength to fight back. And if I remained silent, I would be letting the same cycle of abuse continue. I couldn't let that happen again. I had to protect her. I had to stop this before it went any further. Taking a deep breath, I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she told me. There was no surprise in Gabriel's eyes, no anger, no fury. He didn't even flinch. He simply stood there, watching me, his expression unreadable. It was as if he had already known, as if the truth I had just spoken wasn't new to him. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as he processed my words. His lips didn't move, but I could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing down on me. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Stay quiet," he said, his voice cold and calm, like he was giving me a command, not a suggestion. "For now. This will be handled, but you will say nothing more about it. Understand?" I nodded, my throat dry, my mind racing. "This will be handled." Those words echoed in my mind, but I didn't know what they meant. Would he punish Veronica? Would he take Lily away from her mother? Or was this all part of a larger game that I didn't understand? His eyes met mine again, and I could see the steel beneath his calm exterior. This wasn't about protecting Lily. Not yet. This was about control. The empire he had built, everything he had worked for, was at stake. And if I wasn't careful, I would become just another casualty of his world. "You will stay in your place," Gabriel continued, his tone still icy. "You are here to care for Lily, nothing more. If you step out of line, there will be consequences. Do not forget that." I wanted to argue, to ask him what that meant for Lily. But I didn't. I couldn't. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to fight back, to demand more. But I knew it was futile. This was Gabriel Moretti. He wasn't a man who dealt in negotiations. He didn't care for fairness. He cared only for power, for keeping everything under control. And I was nothing in his world. I was a pawn, and I had just made myself a target by speaking out. Gabriel's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer before he turned and walked toward the door. His steps were quiet, measured, like everything he did was calculated. When he reached the threshold, he paused, looking over his shoulder at me. "Take care of her," he said, his voice low but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "She's not like the rest of them." I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing sense of dread that churned in my stomach. I stood there for a long time, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. What had just happened? What had I gotten myself into? I had spoken the truth, but had I really done anything? Gabriel hadn't shown any sign of surprise, any hint of shock at the abuse Lily was enduring. It was as if he had already known, as if this had all been part of some plan. And what did he mean by, "take care of her"? Was he going to do something about Veronica? Or was this just another way for him to assert his dominance, to remind me that he controlled everything, even the truth? I couldn't stay in this house forever. I couldn't live under the constant pressure of Gabriel's watchful eyes, knowing what I knew about his family. But for now, I was stuck. I had no choice but to play the role I had been given, to be the silent caretaker, to watch over Lily while Gabriel and Veronica continued their twisted dance of power and control. But I wasn't going to sit idly by while Lily suffered. I couldn't. Not anymore. As I left Lily's room that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Gabriel's calm, controlled reaction had only deepened the mystery of this family. What was really going on behind the closed doors of the Moretti mansion? And how far was I willing to go to protect a child who was trapped in a world so much darker than mine? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Lily suffer in silence. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back. The mansion felt colder as I moved through its halls. The weight of my decision hung heavy in the air. Gabriel had warned me to stay quiet, but my conscience screamed at me to do more. And now, as the days stretched on, I wondered if I had made the right choice, or if I had just sealed my fate. The mansion felt like a prison that day. Every hallway, every corner seemed to close in around me, its cold marble floors echoing with a hollow silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The weight of the decisions I had made, of the truth I had spoken, was pressing down on me, and I could feel the eyes of the house watching me. I had crossed a line. There was no denying it now. And I knew it would only be a matter of time before I faced the consequences. It was late afternoon when Veronica found me. I had been in the library, dusting the old bookshelves, trying to drown out my thoughts in the quiet, dusty air. The house was still and empty, and I had hoped to find some peace in the familiar, safe rhythm of my work. but I should have known better. Veronica never let anything go unnoticed, not even my quiet, meaningless tasks. Her footsteps echoed from behind me, her presence unmistakable. I didn't turn around. There was no point in pretending she wasn't there. "You," she said, her voice icy, sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Come here." I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. Veronica was standing in the doorway, her posture regal, her face a mask of calm fury. There was something darker in her eyes now, something colder. It wasn't just disappointment, it was anger, the kind of anger that made my skin crawl. "I didn't think you'd have the audacity to speak up," she continued, her voice a venomous whisper. "I thought you knew your place." I stood frozen, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I knew exactly what she meant. I had overstepped my boundaries. I had crossed a line that no one in this house was supposed to cross. I had dared to speak the truth, to reveal what had been hidden for so long. And now, I was paying the price for it. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I haven't done anything." Veronica's lips curled into a smile, but it was empty, cruel. "Don't lie to me, Ara. You think I didn't notice? You think Gabriel didn't notice? The way you've been looking at Lily, the way you've been hovering over her like some kind of saint. Don't pretend you're just here to care for her. You're playing a dangerous game." I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting the urge to shout, to lash out. But I knew better. I knew that in this house, shouting back would only make things worse. Veronica was a master of manipulation, and she had learned how to wield her power over people without lifting a finger. Her calmness was the most dangerous thing about her. It was the way she could make you believe you were the one at fault, the way she could twist your words and turn them against you, until you felt like you were the one to blame. "I'm just trying to help her," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Lily needs someone. She needs protection." Veronica stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she examined me with cold, calculating precision. "Protection? You think you can protect her? You think you can step into my world and pretend to know what's best for her? You don't know anything about us. You're just a girl who stumbled into this house, and now you think you have the right to tell me how to raise my daughter." Her words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I couldn't speak. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it, the absolute conviction in her voice, as though she truly believed that she was the one in control, that she was the one who knew what was best for Lily, and anyone who disagreed was simply wrong. "You've been crossing lines, Ara," she continued, her voice turning softer now, more insidious. "You've been getting too close to Lily, too protective, too involved. And that's something I don't take lightly. You don't belong here. You never have. And now, you've crossed a line that you can't uncross." I felt the walls closing in on me, the weight of her words suffocating me. I had stepped out of line. I had dared to speak up, to act like I mattered in this house. But I was nothing to her. I was just the babysitter, the pawn in a game I didn't understand. I had no right to be here, no right to intervene, no right to protect Lily. "I'm just trying to help," I repeated, my voice trembling now, the fear creeping into my words. "I'm not trying to take her away from you. I just want to keep her safe." Veronica's smile never wavered. It was a smile that could cut through bone. "Safe? You think you can keep her safe? From me? From the life we've built? You think you're capable of that? You don't even know the first thing about this world, Ara. You don't know what you're dealing with." I could feel the darkness in her words, the coldness seeping into my bones. I had no idea what I was dealing with, but Veronica did. She had spent years building her world, manipulating Gabriel, controlling the people around her. She had always been the one in charge, the one who held all the power. And now she was using that power to intimidate me, to make me question everything I thought I knew. The next few days passed in a haze, my every movement controlled by the fear of what would happen next. Veronica had made it clear that I was treading dangerous ground, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand. that every decision I made would have consequences I couldn't foresee. But it wasn't just Veronica I was afraid of anymore. It was Lily. I could see the change in her. The once bright, innocent child was becoming more withdrawn, more fearful with every passing day. She barely spoke, her eyes always downcast, her movements stiff and unnatural. It was like she had learned to shut herself off from the world, to hide from the people who could hurt her. She was afraid of her mother, and I could see it in the way she flinched whenever Veronica entered a room. It was a fear that ran deep, a fear that went beyond just discipline. It was something darker, something that made my heart ache every time I saw it. One evening, after Veronica had retreated to her wing of the house, I found myself sitting with Lily in the garden. The sun had set, casting a soft golden light over the roses, and Lily was absent-mindedly tracing the edge of a flower with her fingers. I sat beside her, watching her carefully, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. "Lily," I said gently, "are you okay?" She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything at first, but I could feel her tense beside me. Then, finally, she spoke in a whisper, so soft I could barely hear her. "Mommy, she doesn't love me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Lily," I said, my voice shaking, "that's not true. She does love you." Lily shook her head, her small face crumpling as tears welled up in her eyes. "No, she hurts me. She hurts me when no one's looking." I could feel the weight of those words crush me. The truth was there, undeniable, raw, and it tore through everything I had tried to ignore. I had been right all along. Veronica wasn't just distant, she was cruel, and Lily was suffering for it. I spent the rest of the evening with Lily, comforting her as best I could, but nothing seemed to reach her. She was too afraid, too lost in her own world of pain. I didn't know how much longer I could watch her suffer without doing something. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was trapped. This house, this family, it wasn't a place of refuge. It was a place of power, of manipulation, of control. And now, I had become a part of it. I had spoken out, but what good had it done? Lily was still suffering, and the price of speaking the truth had become clearer every day. Veronica's wrath was only just beginning, and I was caught in the middle. I had no idea how I was going to survive this. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let Lily suffer alone. Not anymore. As I sat in the garden, the weight of my decision pressing down on me, I realized something. I was no longer just a bystander in this story. I was part of it, and I had to find a way to break free from the web of manipulation and fear that surrounded me, before it consumed me entirely. The next move would be mine, but I had to be careful. One wrong step, and everything would fall apart. The mansion was cold. It had always been cold in a way, but now it felt colder than ever. The silence in the halls had thickened, like a suffocating blanket, every room steeped in tension that I could taste in the air. Every glance, every word seemed to carry the weight of something unspoken, and I was caught in the middle of it all, unsure of how much longer I could hold my ground. Gabriel Moretti, the man who ruled this house with an iron fist, had changed. At least, that's what I told myself. He was still the same, stoic, cold, detached. But there were moments, fleeting moments, when his gaze softened, when his attention lingered on Lily just a fraction longer than it had before. I caught it during breakfast one morning. Gabriel was sitting at the far end of the long dining table, the morning light filtering through the windows, casting soft shadows on the polished wood. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. His focus was entirely on Lily. She was sitting quietly, her small hands wrapped around a spoon, pushing her cereal around in circles, avoiding his gaze. I could see it now. He wasn't just observing her like he had before. He was watching her closely, with a kind of intent that I hadn't seen from him in the past. There was a subtle shift in his posture, a tightening of his jaw as his eyes tracked her every movement. It wasn't much, but I noticed it. For the first time since I had been here, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a father under all the layers of power and control. That was the first sign, and it was the only one I got for a while. Gabriel still kept his distance, his presence like a shadow that loomed over the house, but his actions spoke volumes. He began to spend more time with Lily. He would join her for her lessons, his deep voice low and soothing as he spoke to her in his own quiet way. He wasn't exactly gentle, but there was something there, something raw and unrefined in the way he interacted with her. He wasn't the father I would have expected, no. That role seemed foreign to him. But there was a sense of concern, of ownership, that cut through his usual detachment. For a man like Gabriel, who lived his life in calculated moves, this was something new. I began to notice the way he watched her, the way his fingers twitched when she would speak to him, as though he wanted to reach out but couldn't, as if some invisible wall kept him from showing the warmth she desperately needed. I wondered how much of his cruelty was a mask, a shield to protect him from the vulnerability of caring too much. But I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The little shifts, the moments when his gaze softened, and the increasing time he spent with her. They told me more than I wanted to know. Gabriel Moretti was conflicted. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know how to care for his daughter without losing control. But there was something else. Beneath the cool exterior, beneath the layers of power and intimidation, Gabriel was afraid. Afraid of what his world might do to his daughter. Afraid of losing control. Then came Veronica's wrath. As Gabriel's attention on Lily grew, so did Veronica's desperation. She could feel it, the shift in power, the way Gabriel's focus was starting to veer away from her and toward their daughter. I saw it in the way she moved through the house now, her eyes always searching, always calculating. Her cold smile, once a constant, had become a thin veneer that barely masked the seething anger beneath it. But she didn't let it show outwardly, not at first. I should have known it was coming. It happened late one evening. I was sitting with Lily in the drawing room, reading to her from a children's book she had grown fond of, her small frame curled up beside me on the couch. The house was quiet, save for the sound of the crackling fire in the hearth. And for a moment, I almost forgot where I was, almost forgot what had brought me here. But then the door opened, and Veronica stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Her eyes immediately found Lily, and I could see the change in her expression, the sudden tightness in her jaw. It wasn't the same cold, calculated look she usually gave Lily. This time, there was something darker in her eyes, a fury, barely contained, that made my blood run cold. "Lily," she said, her voice smooth, but laced with an edge that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "It's time for bed." Lily didn't move. She didn't even look up at her mother, her small fingers still clutching the edge of her blanket, her body tense. I could feel the fear radiating off of her. She was afraid. Afraid of Veronica's anger. Afraid of what might happen if she didn't listen. Veronica's eyes flicked to me, and then, without a word, she walked over to the couch. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing colder as she reached for Lily's arm, pulling her up from the couch with a force that made me flinch. "Now, Lily," Veronica said, her tone sharp. "Get up." Lily didn't resist, but I could see the way she winced when her mother's hand touched her. Her small body seemed to shrink into itself, as if trying to make herself invisible. I wanted to say something, to intervene, but I knew better. Veronica's wrath wasn't something I could stop. Not here, not now. But then I saw it. As Veronica pulled Lily to her feet, her sleeve shifted, and I saw the bruises. Fresh, dark purple bruises on Lily's back. Marks of violence. Marks that I had hoped I wouldn't see. I froze, the blood draining from my face. The moment felt like it was happening in slow motion, the weight of it pressing on my chest as I looked at those bruises. My hands shook as I reached out for Lily, instinctively pulling her close, trying to shield her from her mother's reach. But Veronica's eyes flashed with something darker, something predatory. "This is none of your concern, Ara," Veronica said, her voice low but filled with venom. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." Her words were like a slap, the harshness of them burning through my resolve. I looked at Lily, her wide eyes filled with fear, and I knew then that there was no going back. I had seen too much. I had known the truth for too long. But now, I had evidence. I had something concrete to prove what I had been suspecting all along. Veronica was hurting Lily, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had reached my tipping point. I waited until the house had settled for the night, the echo of footsteps fading down the hall, before I made my decision. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't pretend this wasn't happening, but as I stood outside Gabriel's study, the weight of what I was about to do sank in. I had evidence. I had the bruises. But what would Gabriel do when he saw them? What would he do when he knew the truth? I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Gabriel was standing by the window, looking out at the night sky, his broad frame a silhouette against the darkness. He didn't turn when I entered. He didn't need to. He knew I was there. I stepped forward, holding the evidence in my hand, small, tangible, undeniable. "Gabriel," I said, my voice trembling despite myself. "I need to show you something." His gaze shifted to me, cold and unreadable. But something flickered in his eyes, something that made me wonder if he already knew what I had to say. I held the photographs of Lily's bruises out in front of me, my hands shaking. This is what she's been hiding, what Veronica's been doing. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke volumes. He didn't move, didn't react, but I saw it in his eyes. Something dark, something dangerous. The room felt heavy as I stood before Gabriel, the evidence hanging between us like a sword on a thread. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I had exposed the truth, but now I had to face the consequences. Would Gabriel protect his daughter? Or would this truth be just another casualty in the war of power that raged behind these walls? I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. Everything was about to change. The weight of the photographs in my hand felt heavier with each step I took toward Gabriel's study. They were undeniable, irrefutable proof of the violence Veronica had inflicted on her own daughter. The bruises on Lily's delicate back were the stark reality I could no longer ignore. I had seen the signs. I had suspected the truth. But now, holding these images, I had no excuse left. This wasn't just about protecting Lily anymore. It was about confronting the brutal truth of this family. The truth that had been hidden behind smiles, behind wealth, behind power. I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the handle, as I gathered the last remnants of my courage. The mansion was still, too still. There was no noise, no hum of activity, just silence, the kind that made the heart beat louder in your chest. I had never been one to confront the powerful, not in the way I was about to. But I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I had to act. Gabriel was in his usual spot, standing by the window, his back to me as he looked out into the darkened world beyond the estate. The faint light from his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, creating an air of stillness that made my heart race faster. I walked in quietly, each step measured, but my breath came in shallow gasps. The moment felt too big, too heavy for me to bear, and I knew there was no turning back. Once I spoke, everything would change. He didn't turn when I entered. He didn't need to. He knew I was there, just as he always did. His presence was a constant in this house, like an unmovable force, but I could feel the tension between us, like a taut string pulled too tight. There was so much unsaid between us, and now I was going to shatter the silence. I hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "Gabriel," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "I need you to see something." I held out the photographs, my hands trembling as I passed them into his grasp. His eyes flicked down to the images in his hand, his face unreadable as he studied them. He didn't react at first, didn't flinch, didn't show the anger I had expected. His gaze remained cold, distant, as he flipped through the photos, and for a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake. What if he didn't care? What if he dismissed it all as just another trivial issue in the world he had built? But then, I saw it. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Something dark. Something that spoke of a man who was fighting to hold on to the empire he had built. And a father who was struggling to reconcile the man he was with the man he wanted to be. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. The kind of voice he used when he was suppressing something fierce inside. "From Lily," I said quietly, my heart thudding in my chest. "She's been hiding it." I couldn't stay quiet any longer. Gabriel remained silent, his gaze flicking to the photos and then back to me. But I could see the shift in his expression. It was subtle, like a dam starting to crack, but it was there. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened, the flicker of vulnerability in them quickly masked by a cold, unreadable gaze. But there was no denying it anymore. He saw the truth. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of the evidence between us hung heavy in the air, suffocating, and I could feel the tension rise like smoke in the room. He wasn't just a mafia boss now. He was a father, and that was something no amount of power could prepare him for. Finally, Gabriel spoke, his voice softer now, though still with that controlled edge. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I could hear the frustration in his words, the weight of betrayal that lurked just beneath the surface. But there was something else, too. Something I hadn't expected. Regret. It was brief, fleeting, but it was there. I wasn't sure what I'd be walking into, I admitted, my own voice trembling. But now I can't stay silent. Not with this. Gabriel's gaze flicked to the floor, his brow furrowed as if he were processing everything. It was clear now. He had been hiding behind a wall of denial, refusing to see what was happening in his own home. He had built an empire, sure, but at what cost? His eyes finally met mine again, and for the first time, I saw something that wasn't just the cold mask of a businessman. There was a hint of humanity there, a deep, buried well of emotion that he had buried for years, too afraid to confront it, too afraid to face what had been done to his daughter. "I didn't know," he said, his voice rougher now. "I didn't know it had gone this far. I didn't see it." The shift in Gabriel's demeanor was subtle but undeniable. The icy barrier between us had cracked, just slightly. Enough for me to see the man beneath the surface. The man who was trapped in his own world, trying desperately to hold on to something, anything, that would give him control. But there was something broken in him, something that even his power couldn't fix. And in that moment, I knew what had to happen next. Gabriel's decision was unexpected, and it was swift. There was no hesitation, no long-winded speeches about loyalty or family. When he spoke again, his voice was cold, detached. But there was a clarity in his words that made everything else fall away. "Veronica," he said, his voice hardening, "is no longer welcome here." I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a decision to protect Lily. It was a severing of ties, a cutting away of something that had been part of his life for so long. And it was happening now, in the span of a few seconds, as if everything had led up to this singular moment. Gabriel didn't explain himself, didn't offer any justification. He simply turned, heading toward the door. "I'll handle this," he said, his tone final. "But there will be consequences." I couldn't speak. I was still processing the shock of his decision, the rawness of it. For the first time, Gabriel had chosen his daughter over his wife. He had chosen to protect her, to stand against the woman who had been the center of his world for so long. What followed was a series of events that seemed to unfold in slow motion, as if everything was happening too quickly to fully grasp. The staff were suddenly bustling in the halls, whispers spreading like wildfire through the house. It didn't take long for Gabriel's decision to reach every corner of the estate, but Veronica wasn't going down without a fight. The confrontation came late that night. I was in the kitchen, helping Maria prepare dinner, when I heard the unmistakable sound of Veronica's heels clicking down the hallway. There was no hiding it. She was angry, and she was coming for Gabriel. I stayed out of sight, watching through the kitchen door as she stormed into the hallway, her eyes blazing with fury. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Gabriel stood in front of her, unyielding, his posture rigid, his gaze sharp and unblinking. It was clear that Veronica wasn't going to take this lying down. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Veronica hissed, her voice low but laced with venom. "You can't just throw me out of your life like this, Gabriel. You think you're going to replace me with her?" Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He simply nodded to the two bodyguards standing by the door, who moved in to escort her out. There was no ceremony, no debate. This was final. Veronica's hold on the estate was slipping away, and she knew it. Her eyes burned with rage as the guards approached, but there was nothing she could do. The Moretti Empire was shifting beneath her feet, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Don't think you're going to get away with this, Gabriel," she spat, her eyes locking onto mine, her glare full of hatred and threats. "This isn't over." And with that, she was gone. As the door to the estate closed behind Veronica, I stood frozen, still reeling from the rawness of what had just happened. Gabriel had made his choice. He had taken a stand, and now everything was about to change. But the storm wasn't over. Veronica's wrath would not be silenced so easily. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The mansion felt different now. The shadows that had once seemed like silent observers now felt lighter, as if the weight of Veronica's presence had been lifted from every corner. The air was less oppressive, though still thick with the complexity of the life we all led under this roof. Gabriel's decision to remove Veronica from the estate had reverberated throughout the house, shaking the very foundations of the Moretti Empire. The power dynamics had shifted, and it wasn't clear yet whether they would ever return to the way they were before. But one thing was certain. Gabriel had chosen Lily. The aftermath of that night's confrontation was still unfolding in ways I wasn't ready for. Gabriel's cold, calculated response to Veronica's departure had left me with as many questions as answers. He was still the same man, stoic, composed, dangerous. But there was a subtle shift in him. His actions now were different. His gaze lingered on Lily longer, his steps closer to hers as he tried to right the wrongs he had failed to see for so long. But in his eyes, I could see the burden of what had been lost. Not just his wife, but the years that had been stolen from his daughter's childhood. Gabriel had always been a man of control, a man who thrived on keeping everything in its place. But now, he was struggling to maintain that control in a world that was suddenly chaotic, unpredictable. He had chosen to protect his daughter, but the cost of that decision was still unclear. I spent my days caring for Lily, watching her transform before my eyes. Without Veronica's constant presence, the fear that had once gripped her seemed to loosen, just a little. The girl who had once shrunk in on herself, who had hidden behind her own walls, was slowly beginning to trust again. Her once distant eyes now held a flicker of something. Curiosity, perhaps? A glimpse of the child she had once been, before the darkness of her mother's abuse had stolen her innocence. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. There were still moments when she would flinch, when she would pull away from my touch, as if expecting punishment. But over time, she began to trust me more. She would sit beside me on the couch, her small hand finding mine as we read together. There was a quiet, fragile kind of peace settling into her life. It wasn't perfect, and I knew it wouldn't be for a while. But it was a start. And I couldn't help but feel a growing bond between us. A bond that went beyond just babysitting, beyond just the role I had been thrust into. I wasn't just protecting her anymore. I was helping her heal. But it wasn't just Lily who was changing. It was me too. Gabriel's presence in the house was no longer the same. He had always been a distant figure to me, a man of power whose world I had never fully understood. But since Veronica's departure, there was a crack in his armor, a vulnerability that he didn't always try to hide. There were moments, fleeting moments, when our eyes would meet, and in those moments, something unspoken passed between us. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. It was complicated, of course. I was still a guest in his home. I was still the outsider, the one who had no true place here. But the more time I spent with him, the more I realized how much I had misunderstood him. His world, his empire, was built on manipulation and control. But beneath that, there was a man who had been hurt, who had made mistakes, and who was trying, in his own way, to protect the one person who mattered most to him. Lily. And yet, despite the bond that was growing between Gabriel and me, the distance between us remained. It was there in the way he would retreat to his study after spending time with Lily, in the way he would shut himself off from everything and everyone. He was still the same man who ruled with an iron fist, who used his power to control those around him. But now, he was trying to do something different. One evening, after dinner, Gabriel sat beside me in the drawing room, a rare moment of peace between the two of us. Lily had gone to bed early, her laughter from earlier still echoing in my mind. I had never seen her so full of life, so free from the shadow of fear that had consumed her. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she would be okay. Gabriel was quiet, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest of his chair as he stared at the fire. The warmth from the flames flickered across his face, but the hardness in his eyes remained. I wasn't sure what to say to him, what to do to bridge the distance between us. Everything about this house, about this life, felt like a constant balancing act. "I've been thinking," Gabriel said, his voice low, almost hesitant. It was the first time I'd heard him sound like this, uncertain, unsure. About Lily, about everything. I turned toward him, my heart beating a little faster. "What do you mean?" I'm not sure what I've been doing," he continued, his voice strained. "I've spent so much time building this empire, keeping everything under control. But I lost sight of the most important thing. I lost sight of her." His words hung in the air between us, raw and unguarded. For a moment, I saw the man beneath the power, the father who was desperate to make things right. "I didn't see it," Gabriel continued, his eyes flicking to the fire as if looking for answers. "The way she's been suffering, how much damage has been done. I thought I could protect her by keeping her safe, by giving her everything she wanted. But all she needed was me. And I failed her." His voice was quieter now, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability in him. It wasn't the cold, calculating Gabriel I had come to know. It was the man who had been forced to confront his failures, the man who wanted redemption but didn't know how to find it. "You didn't fail her," I said softly. "You're doing everything you can now." He looked at me then, his eyes intense and focused. "I'm trying," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "I don't know what the future holds, but I will protect her. And I will protect you too. You've been the one constant in this house. You've been the one person who hasn't walked away. I owe you more than you know." I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to say something, to let him know that I had only done what was right. But another part of me, the part that was still trying to stay detached, couldn't shake the fear of what might happen next. Gabriel's world was dangerous. His empire was built on a foundation of power, of ruthless decisions, and I didn't know if I was ready to be a part of it. But in that moment, all I could do was nod. He was trying, and that was more than I had ever expected from him. The following days were filled with small, quiet moments of progress. Gabriel became more involved in Lily's life. He took her to the garden to pick flowers. He read to her at night. And for the first time in a long time, there was a tenderness in his actions that made me believe there might be hope for them after all. As for Lily, the healing process was slow, but it was happening. She smiled more. She laughed more. She began to trust again, and every time I saw her face light up, I felt a small piece of the weight in my chest lift. She was no longer the frightened, withdrawn girl I had first met. She was beginning to reclaim the childhood she had been robbed of. One evening, as I sat beside the fire, Gabriel walked into the room, his face calm but thoughtful. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at me as if he were measuring the space between us, trying to decide what to say. And then, without warning, he spoke. You saved her, he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. You saved her, Ara. I'll never be able to thank you enough. I met his gaze, my heart heavy with unspoken words. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I wasn't sure how to process the gratitude in his eyes, the weight of what he was saying. But even though the words were simple, they carried the weight of everything that had happened. The violence, the fear, the lies, the betrayal, and the hope that was still buried beneath it all. But even as Gabriel spoke those words, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than I realized. His gratitude was genuine, but there was something deeper, something unspoken, lingering between us. We had come this far, but the road ahead was still uncertain. I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when Gabriel's world caught up with him? What would happen when the empire he had built began to unravel? I didn't know the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. Things were never going to be the same again. The mansion was quieter than usual that evening, the only sound being the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. It was a rare stillness, one that seemed to reflect the change that had come over the estate since Veronica's departure. Gabriel's decisions had irrevocably altered the course of our lives, and as the days passed, I could feel the shift in the air. The empire he had built with such cold precision was now tempered by something he had long buried, something he wasn't sure how to navigate: love. I sat in the library, leafing through an old book on art history, trying to lose myself in something familiar, something that didn't remind me of the war I was in the midst of. But even as I flipped through the pages, my thoughts kept returning to Gabriel. The man who had once seemed so distant, so untouchable, had shown me a side of himself I had never expected. Vulnerability, regret, guilt. It was late, well past midnight, when Gabriel entered the library. His footsteps were quiet, but they still carried the weight of his presence. I didn't look up at first, not sure if I was ready to face him. I had seen the transformation, the way he had changed in the past few weeks. But tonight, there was something different about him. He wasn't the cold, calculating kingpin who had orchestrated every move in his empire. Tonight, he seemed smaller. A man who had been broken down by the weight of his own choices. Ara, his voice was soft, almost hesitant. Can we talk? I set the book aside, feeling the tension in my chest. This wasn't the kind of conversation I had expected from him. I nodded, motioning for him to sit. He sat down across from me, his posture still stiff but more relaxed than I had ever seen him. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now tired. There was an exhaustion in his gaze that spoke of long, sleepless nights spent wrestling with the demons of his past. Ara, He paused, taking a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought he might not continue. But then, he spoke again, his voice low and raw. I've made so many mistakes. With my family, with Lily, with everything. I leaned forward, my hands resting on my knees, my heart thumping in my chest. What do you mean? Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, looking down at the floor as though the weight of his words was too much to bear. I've spent my life building this empire, making sure nothing could touch it. I thought power was everything, that if I kept everything in my control, I could protect the people I loved. But I was wrong. His words were simple, but they hit me like a wave. There was no bravado, no defensiveness in his voice. Just a man who had realized that all the power in the world meant nothing if you couldn't protect the ones you loved. I failed her, he said quietly, his voice breaking. I failed my daughter. I was so focused on keeping the world outside of our walls at bay that I never saw what was happening inside. I didn't protect her when she needed me the most. His hands clenched into fists on his lap, his eyes dark with regret. And now, every day I wonder if I can ever make up for that. If I can ever fix what I've broken. The vulnerability in his voice made my heart ache. Gabriel, the man who had ruled this world with cold efficiency, had become a father who was terrified of failing again, of repeating the mistakes of his past. I had always seen him as untouchable, as a man who could never be shaken by anything. But now, I saw the cracks in his armor. I saw the fear, the guilt, the overwhelming desire to do right by Lily. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but something held me back. I had been part of his world for too long now, and I had seen the cost of living in it. He wasn't just a man who had made mistakes. He was a man whose mistakes were woven into the very fabric of his empire. His power had been built on moral compromises, on decisions that had left a trail of broken people in his wake. Ara, I've always believed that power was the answer, Gabriel continued, his voice thick with emotion. But now I know that power isn't what matters. What matters is the people you love. And I've failed the only two people who matter to me. His words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had seen Gabriel's power, his ruthlessness, his ability to destroy everything in his path. But this side of him, the vulnerable, self-aware man who was capable of regret, was new to me. It made him seem human, and it terrified me. Gabriel, I began, my voice soft. You can't change the past. You can only change what happens from here. He looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine as if looking for an answer to the question that had been tormenting him. But how do I change it? How do I fix what I've broken? I thought about his question for a moment, the weight of it pressing down on me. Gabriel had always been a man of action, of control. But now he was asking how to undo the damage, how to make things right. And I knew that no matter how much power he had, no matter how many people feared him, the only thing that would truly fix this was time. And love. You start with your daughter, I said quietly. You've already done more than I think anyone expected. You've chosen to protect her, to put her first. That's all you can do. Gabriel's gaze softened slightly as he nodded, but the doubt was still there, lingering in his eyes. And what about you? He asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. What about this? What about us? I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the question. We had been dancing around this moment for so long, both of us holding back, neither of us wanting to fully confront the growing tension between us. But now, with the air cleared between us, it felt impossible to ignore any longer. I didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. How could I? I was caught between two worlds. The world Gabriel had built, one of power and danger, and the quiet, peaceful life I had always dreamed of. And now, I had to decide which one I wanted. Gabriel seemed to read my thoughts as his gaze shifted away, the weight of his own internal battle reflecting in his eyes. I know what you're thinking, he said softly. I know you're wondering if you can live in this world. But I want you to know, I will protect you. I will protect Lily. And I will do whatever it takes to make sure neither of you has to live in fear again. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that things could be different, that his world of ruthless control could somehow be softened by the love he felt for his daughter, and for me. But deep down, I knew the truth. Gabriel's world was not one that could be easily changed. It was a world of danger, of moral compromise, and of sacrifices I wasn't sure I was ready to make. But as Gabriel's words lingered in the air, as he sat there, exposed and vulnerable before me, I realized that the decision wasn't about whether I could change him or his world. It was about whether I could accept the man he was, flaws and all, and whether I could find a way to fit into the life he had chosen. The quiet that followed felt different than the silence that had defined our relationship up until now. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a mutual recognition that we both had our demons, and that we were both trying, in our own ways, to make things right. Ara, Gabriel said, breaking the silence, his voice quieter than before. I don't have an answer for you. Not yet. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be the man I should have been all along. For her. For you. I looked at him, the vulnerability in his eyes unmistakable, and in that moment, I made my choice. I wasn't ready to leave this world behind, not yet. I wasn't ready to walk away from Gabriel or Lily. They had both come to mean something to me, something I couldn't quite define, but something that was more real than anything I had ever known. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here for both of you." The fire crackled softly in the hearth as Gabriel and I sat in the quiet of the library, two souls bound by circumstance, by love, and by the ghosts of our pasts. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know what the next day, the next moment would bring. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could figure it out together. And in that fragile hope, I found something that had been missing for so long: peace. But even as Gabriel and I shared this fragile moment of understanding, I knew that our world was far from safe. His empire, the one he had worked so hard to build, was still in danger. And we were all caught in its web, trying to survive the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. But for now, we had each other. And that, in this world of shadows, was enough. If this story touched you, make sure you're subscribed because I've saved something extra special for you tomorrow.